Good evening. I'm Peter Gilbert, a Chicago-based filmmaker. I've been involved with Cartemquin Films for 40 years. I'm one of the filmmakers behind Hoop Dreams. And I continue to make documentary and narrative films. And I teach at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, as well as being the head of the ED of the Southern Documentary Fund. And before we begin, I just want to say, I want to personally thank the Chicago Humanities Festival for their amazing work and for their support of documentary, our whole field, and for putting on this fest during these really horrible times of COVID. So I really appreciate the work that they've done over the years. So it is an honor for me to be leading this discussion tonight with these two brilliant filmmakers, Gregory Kershaw and Michael Dweck, who together have given us the Truffle Hunters. Good evening.
Good evening. We're honored to be here.
Hey, Peter. It's great to be here.
I'm going to give a quick introduction. Michael Dweck is an award-winning filmmaker and visual artist known for his narrative, photographic, and film projects. His work depicts the beauty and intricacy of human life while exploring ongoing struggles between identity and the adaptation within endangered societal enclaves. In 2019, he was a Sundance Institute Catalyst Forum Fellow and Sundance Music and Sound Design Lab Fellow. The Truffle Hunters, his second feature documentary film, premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, then went on to screen at over 35 international festivals. And the film is currently shortlisted for the 2021 Oscars Best Documentary Feature Film. Gregory Kershaw is a documentary and narrative filmmaker whose work explores the complexity of humans confronting an ever-changing world and is recognized for its atmospheric and visually driven approach. The Truffle Hunters, Kershaw's first documentary feature as a director. He worked with Michael as the producer and director of photography on the Sundance Film Festival screen documentary, The Last Race. He is also a Sundance Fellow. Previously, he directed documentaries that explored the impact of climate change on rural indigenous communities and stories about current species extinction crises filmed in remote locations around the world. So, good evening. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure.
So I just have to start by saying, as a filmmaker, I just love your film. I'm totally enamored by it. It's incredibly unique. And I say that especially in these times of sort of Netflix and Amazon, and where documentaries can turn into templates. Crime kind of ones, cult films, celebrity. It is really wonderful to see a beautifully made, character-driven, unique, painterly film. I mean, it's just beautifully realized, it's incredibly edited, and it is just the care that's taken in every detail that you put in this film is just heartwarming for me as a filmmaker.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks for making
that.
So one of the things I want to sort of start with, because I think it's always interesting how people meet, in terms of making films together. How did you guys meet?
Well, we lived in Manhattan in the same building in Greenwich Village, and we were always talking about working together on a project. And I had been photographing at the racetrack on Long Island for 3.5 years, trying to document its, memorializing, I guess, the racetrack. And we started to talk about let's try, going out there with a camera and filming this crazy place. And that's how it started. So that took another, that took 5 years in total to make that film. And we got to know each other, really well. And then we realized that we had this obsession about finding these worlds that extinct outside the sphere of globalization and technology. In the case of the racetrack, of course, and Truffle Hunters is a world that's maintained their identity and a connection to culture, and that's something that's very important to us. And we didn't realize it at the time, but one summer we were both traveling separately through the Piedmont region of Italy, the northern mountains of Italy, And we were struck by this place that felt like we were moving through a fairy tale. It was like moving through a storybook. And it of course it's spectacular. It has every little hilltop has a little town. There's beautiful vineyards. But what was striking to us, I think, was that it seemed to be removed from the modern world in many ways, and it moved at a very, very different rhythm. It hadn't been taken over by globalized culture. We had learned there was a secret society of these men that were, what people said, were kind of hiding in the mountains at night with their dogs and searching out this rare white truffle that cannot be cultivated and can only be found in a small little strip of land in Italy. And we went back to kind of find out what this world was about. So what we thought would take a couple of months turned into a 3-year exploration of this world.
So it's interesting. I'm a longitudinal filmmaker. That's what I call it. I make films over a period of number of years. So I totally relate to all of that. And I also relate to starting a film and thinking, oh, it's going to be like, 3-4 months. And it turns into 5-6 years or whatever.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is, when was that moment sort of for you where you knew it wasn't going to be 3 or 4 months, that you knew you were in it for a very different, sort of a different time period?
Well, I think, early on, we didn't start the film process with a story. It was this feeling that Michael described, we entered into this world and it felt like a fairy tale to us, and we were drawn into it, and we were drawn into the mystery, and we really had no idea what it would be. We had no idea, at that point, we had no idea who the Truffle Hunters were. And so, I think the first part of the process for us was just figuring out who the Truffle Hunters were. And that actually took a lot of time because everything in this world is a secret. So, we went on this first trip we took there to start exploring, we went to a trattoria, where they were serving truffles from the region. And we asked the restaurant owner, we said, could you introduce us to the Truffle Hunter who you buy the truffles from, that you have on your menu every day of truffle season? He said, oh, I've never met the guy. I put some money in a box, and then the next morning there's a truffle there. And that we realized that, the Truffle Hunters, the identity of the Truffle Hunters is a secret within the community. So we had to, before we could even meet the Truffle Hunters, we had to start building relationships, and we meant, having a lot of coffee with, sitting down for coffee with the priest who introduced us to his cousin, who introduced us to his best friend growing up. And eventually we did start meeting the Truffle Hunters. And the same thing, everything about this world is a secret. Where they hunt for truffles is a secret. Where they sell their truffles is a secret. Who they sell them to. And it really just, it took time to build relationships with the people that we were filming. And that happened, before we even really thought about taking the camera out. We wanted to build relationships that would allow us to do that in the way that we wanted to. And the way that we wanted to was, we wanted to go deep. We wanted to understand not just the surface layer of facts of the world, but really understand the feeling of the world. And that's where everything started. It's just, what did it, at the simplest level, like, what did it feel like to sit in Carlo's kitchen while he was eating lunch with his family? What does it mean to go into the truffle forest in the middle of the night alone with a truffle hunter and their dog? Like, all that has a very a specific feel that's it's unlike any other place in the world. And we wanted to figure out a way to translate that into cinema. And so the research process, it wasn't about collecting facts and collecting knowledge. It was really about building relationships and understanding this world and to the fullest extent possible.
It's interesting. I love the way that you use the word relationships, because I'm not in love with the word, they always say, people, how did you get access to your subject? Yeah. And, and in a way, it's not access, it's building trust. Mm-hmm. And so can you guys remember a moment that suddenly you knew that trust was beginning to build with your characters?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I think the first time we tasted a truffle might have been that moment. it took a while. I mean, I think we were going through the woods. So imagine, like, we would go there 3 weeks on, 1 week back home, 3 weeks on, and doing this for months and months per season, from September straight through to January. And we would a lot of times just follow, 7 people and film them and see what we got. And most of the time they would just make us pay our dues in the beginning, which meant going through the mud and on these cliffs. There's 80, 85-year-old men walking 15 to 20 miles a night in the mud, in the cold, and with us having camera equipment with us, not filming everything they're doing, just kind of waiting if maybe there's a possible moment that we can capture, but taking everything with us anyway. And we had been with this one character for nights. Nothing was happening. There was a drought for months. It hadn't rained in Italy, which is very unusual. And he finally found a truffle. It was like this big, and maybe it was worth, I don't know, 75 or 100 euros. And we thought he was going to go to the side of the road out. You go like, sun up, you go to the side of the road, and John Franco comes in his Range Rover and does his route and, pulls out the cash and weighs it in his hand and says, I think it's a little less, 40 grams, 42 grams, and gives you the money and drives away. But instead of, instead of waiting for John Franco, he told us to follow him. And he took us into his cabin, like a beautiful, very humble wooden cabin. And he put wood into a wood burning stove, went outside to get eggs from his chickens, and got a beautiful old cast iron skillet that must have been 100 years old, put it on the top of the wood burning stove and cracked the eggs inside, and then started to shave truffles on top of the eggs and put them in plates, and asked us to sit at his table, and said, this is for you. I mean, and it was a way of him, although we didn't speak the language at all and we didn't have a translator with us, it was a sign that we were welcomed into the community, into his life and into the community. And word in that town, in this village, spreads really quickly. They don't have social media like we have. They don't use phones and computers, and they've never been to a movie theater before. But yet everybody knew what we were up to, day by day. They could track where we were, even if they were like 50 miles away from one another, different village. They kind of knew where we were. But I think that was that was one of the first moments where we kind of knew there was trust. And it took. Every character was quite different. With the Aurelio, we learned, but we put the doggy cam, we call it, on top, the camera on top of the dog's head. We learned that there were intimate conversations that he was having with Berba, that there seemed to be a conversation between Berba and Aurelio.
So just so people know, Berba is the dog.
Yeah,
right?
and part of his family. Like, they all treat them as part of their family. Yeah. But we had learned there that there was, that there were things that Aurelio shared with Berba that most people don't share with their dogs about the future. He was talking about planning a Christmas dinner for Berba and going to all the farms around the village and getting all these ingredients to prepare dinner for Berba and the other 2 dogs he had. And then at some point he invited us into his home and served us lunch, and that was kind of a breakthrough moment. That took a year maybe before he invited us into his home. But that's the scene you see on this poster behind me, is the first time that he invited us into his home, and he had 4 plates, ceramic plates on his table, and there were 3 of us. It was just Aurelio, me, and Gregory. And he cooked chicken soup, and really Berba hopped on the table. He served Berba first the chicken and the vegetables, and then asked us to sit down, and we had the broth that was left over. But we learned there that his how close he was to the dog, and that was also a moment where he trusted us to finally ask us to come into his home.
I think for people who haven't seen the film, maybe you could just sort of give us a feel for what I have to admit. I saw the film a couple months ago for the first time. And I didn't really know much about truffles. I'm not a super foodie. I knew about them a little bit, that they, were expensive and et cetera. But for people who don't know, sort of, and again, it's one of the great things about the film is that the film is really magical and it has a lot of mystery in it. And one of the things that's really mysterious are these crazy looking truffles that they handle like they're literally gold. I mean, they're scared to touch them, scrape them, worried about if the dog, scratches them, or, it's an amazing thing. So maybe you could just describe sort of, the meaning of truffles to that region.
Well, I mean, truffles, there is something about them that's magical, especially the white truffle that's at the center of the truffle trade in this film.
So it's a
And
just for people like, because I'm going to act like I know nothing, but it's kind of in the mushroom realm.
yeah, it's not a mushroom. It's a fungus. It grows underneath the ground.
Yeah.
And the white truffle can't be cultivated. So other types of truffles can be cultivated in pretty much anything that we eat. We've figured out how to cultivate it, in most cases industrialize the process of making it. But the white truffle has kind of eluded the grasp of science. And it can only be found in this region in Italy where we filmed, a little bit into some of the neighboring countries, but it requires very, very specific conditions. And everybody has, all the truffle hunters have their own theories about why a truffle blooms where it blooms. Some people think it's when lightning strikes a tree. Some people think that it has to do with the phases of the moon. Actually, most people think that it has something to do with the phases of the moon. Other people think that it has to do with like warlocks in the woods. And there's all sorts of theories around different energy lines that flow through the forest. We worked with a water diviner, somebody who uses, he searches the energy lines to find wells, but he also thinks he can find truffles by following the dark energy towards them. So there's something just kind of inherently magical about this thing that science, just hasn't cracked the code on. And that, I think, the people that find it have this ability that, I mean, it's really just a handful of people in the world can do what they do. And it's based on a knowledge that's been passed down through the generations, and really takes, to become a good truffle hunter, it takes a lifetime to cultivate, because it's not just knowing where a truffle might grow. It's really kind of, they have sort of a sixth sense about them, and sort of the way they understand the forest and how they interact with the forest. And then of course they need a dog that is really well trained. It takes at least 3 years to train a dog, and they have to be kind of gifted. They're, a good truffle dog is sort of picked when they're very young, and you can tell if it has the gift, if it becomes, basically they become obsessed by the smell of truffles, and they become activated at an early age, and all they want to do is hunt for truffles. So all those things have to come together to find this ingredient that, that science can't take a hold. Science hasn't figured out how to control. But these men have a way of using this. It's almost like a magical power to unearth it from the ground.
And it's almost worth the price of gold. I mean, in the auction, the film, people have seen the film. In the auction scene, there's a truffle the size of a baseball. That truffle sold for $100,000.
It's just, it's amazing. And also the way that the people, one of the things that I guess what I'm getting at is what you did that's really beautiful about the film is that it's sort of like you're in two eras, 2 centuries almost. Mm-hmm. So you have the truffle hunters, but then there's also the modern industry which has probably always been there in some way. It's just they're more modern now. This modern industry of people who look at this as a commodity, mm-hmm. and it is treated as it is gold. And I think that's one of the really beautiful contrasts in the film, is this thing of going where you really get this sense of people who are really without technology, who are in this very simple life. And then, but the second they walk out of the forest, as you said, there's a buyer there who's ready to weigh it, calculate it, do all that, and still somehow connect to the older generation. Mm-hmm. And there's one moment I have to tell people, it's a reason to watch the film in itself. There's one moment where there's like, it's beautifully lit, it's incredible, but I think it's a church. And there's the 2 characters are in silhouette, and it's a truffle deal. Mm-hmm. And it's just great. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It's so fantastic. It's like they're meeting at 2 a.m, it feels like, and they're, dealing truffles. It's incredible, that access. I'm also curious how you got access to that world, which I could see really wanting to shut you down.
Well, that took forever, because people were saying to us, You know, there's a secret little truffle market, a black truffle market that happens at like 3 a.m. in this one town in the shadow of a church. And they told us specifically where it was because it was in front of this one church in the town. So we went to that church the next day, and we ran into a woman who had lived right across the street from the church, up 2 floors up. And we asked her, "Do you know anything about this black market where all these people come on like Wednesdays at 3 a.m? No, I've been living here 30 years. She said, "It doesn't exist. I would know it." We said, "Okay, well." But then we decided to come back at 3 a.m. on that Wednesday, and of course, there it was. It was it was the strangest. You had these men, these old 80-year-old men in trench coats and hats because it was kind of raining. It was a misty night, and these rain hats and coats, and scurrying around waiting for something. We didn't know what. And then all of a sudden, a car pulls up, like a 1974. It's a Panda. It's like a 4-wheel drive car full of mud, and this car had truffles in it because as soon as the hatchback opened, you could see the whole street just smelled of truffles. And all these guys who were buyers kind of just scurried over there really quick and then disappeared down these alleys to make what appeared to be like drug deals. And then they were gone, poof, finished. Like they never existed. 15, 20 minutes, the whole thing was over. And then we started to, follow one guy who we had seen before, and he looked like a perfect dealer.
And that was Franco?
Franco, exactly. Yeah. Well, Franco, not John Franco. Franco. There's two different characters. Franco's sitting with John Franco in the restaurant talking about
I meant
problem territory.
Right.
So, but he has this rain hat on. He's always in shadows. He's always smoking cigarettes. You see a silhouette of his very Italian nose. It's very beautiful. But he would never talk to us. So we followed him down the street and we just said, "Can we buy you an espresso?" No, I don't have nothing to do. No. I mean, then we started to see him in other villages the next year. He'd pop up everywhere. Say, "Wait a minute, we know you. You're the guy from." No, I'm not. No, I'm not him. You got me mixed up with somebody else. And then somebody helping us was a medical doctor in the village, and we told him we want to talk to this character because he looks like he's up to something. We always see him around. It turns out that's his medical doctor. He said, "Well, I'll get him to talk to you." And that's another way like these things started. So he introduced us to him. We went to his house. We drank wine for a while. He wouldn't talk about anything about truffle hunting. He said, "I'm working for somebody and I can't tell you who, but I can't talk to you." And this went on for weeks and weeks until we kind of met this other character who was kind of running his show. And then he gave us permission to talk to him. And then that built another relationship that we had with him. But it was, there was so many of these people that we were running into in this village. Each one was just so mysterious and so interesting. And they were following these beautiful traditions because you didn't have to sell the truffle 3 o'clock in the morning. You probably could have sold it during the day. But the tradition continued. The same with the chef. There's a scene in the film. There's a 3-star Michelin chef in the film, Enrico Crippa, who has a restaurant, Piazza Duomo in Alba. And we thought, Winter's Restaurant is this beautiful restaurant, 2nd floor in the main square. And we thought we can film him with John Franco sorting through the truffles in his restaurant. But he said, "I don't buy them. I buy them 2 o'clock in the morning on the side alley." And he has a hood on. And that's exactly how he buys. We didn't know why. He just said, that's just how it's done. He said, "Don't ask questions. That's just how it's done."
The truffle buyers they're so interesting because they're the conduit between these two worlds that otherwise they're right next to each other and they run parallel to each other, but they never connect. The truffle hunters and the truffle consumption. I mean, this town of Alba where Gianfranco has the shop, I mean, it's where billionaires fly in for the weekend on their private jets to taste truffles at a 3-star Michelin restaurant. And that's happening just a few miles away is where the truffle hunters live. But the worlds never connect except for the truffle dealer, who's the conduit, who interfaces between these two worlds and makes the big deals and, buys a truffle in the woods. And 2 hours later, he's on the phone with somebody in Hong Kong shipping a truffle for tens of thousands of dollars.
So I think it would be great for you guys to explain sort of the lives of the truffle hunters in general, because it's really fascinating. It's not necessarily, you see pieces of it in the film, but one of the really beautiful things about the film is that you let mystery live. it's very different than a normal kind of verite film, maybe the kind of film I might make. So there's all these really beautiful scenes. And so, you know, like you see people sitting at a table with lots of tomatoes, and you get the sense maybe they're farmers, or with grapes, or so. Could you talk about what their lives were like? Because I'm not even sure how long the truffle season is. Is it all year round? Is it?
Well, it starts from mid-September and goes to about mid-January. That's depending on the weather. And most of them are farmers during the day. Like Carlo is a grape farmer. He has an expansive vineyard where he grows Moscato grapes to make Prosecco. And Egidio also has a farm. He's a farmer. He grows everything, all kinds of fruits and vegetables, and that's his life. So during the day, they have a very, very active life. They have rituals of a farm family. They wake up very early in the morning. They have animals they have to tend to. Some of them they have to tend to the farm, and then at night they go truffle hunting. And so these are people that are 80, 85 right now. Like Carlo's 89. He celebrated his 89th birthday last week, and they're all fit. They're all we could not keep up with Carlo or any of them for that matter. We had a sound person just really, most of his job was not recording sound. It was holding Carlo's wrist, because we didn't want to lose him, because Carlo was always on the run. That's why you see the scene in the film of Maria always calling Carlo down the valley, because she's always calling Carlo down the valley. So they have very, very busy lives. And you were talking about these painterly kind of environments, and that was really how it looked to us. Greg, we were talking earlier about this idea of this fairy tale, this storybook. We decided to present that to the audience, is that how, let's create these beautiful paintings, and let's take you through a series of paintings through the story, one by one. And that, took time. It took time for them to get used to us, for us to immerse ourselves in that world. I don't think we saw it shoot anything for months and months before, because we had to just get to know their family, Greg. So we had to get to know who the Truffle Hunters were first, the real ones, and then we had to really get them used to us because we're American. And we also don't speak the language. We had a translator who became our co-producer, but she was really busy, dealing with other things.
Language, right? It's not straight Italian, right? It's a dialect.
It's a dialect called Piedmontese, which is a mixture of, I think, German, French, and Italian. Yeah, and that's the language they were most comfortable speaking.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did want to talk to you about, and the poor people watching are going to have to suffer through this, because my director of photography and still photography background. But for people who haven't seen the film, one of the things that's unbelievably amazing about it is that basically you're looking at still frames, no movement within the frames. The only people moving within the frames are the people. The light is painterly. It felt like you had waited for 6-7 hours for the light to hit the right place, and then somehow you magically got the people to stand in the light in the right time and place. And then the other thing, there's never any coverage. So for people who aren't documentarians, usually when you film a scene, you go for a scene and you film it, and there's usually a moment that you go, okay, this is the moment of the scene, what it's about. And then you think about, what coverage do I need? Like cutaways of someone's face or people's hands or walls, and things on it that can add to this, but also allow you to shorten and lengthen the scene. You guys, it looked like that. Tell me if you even took coverage, and if you did, because it's amazing. It's like these entire scenes play out like you've written them, and that's hard to do if you were writing a narrative script to play a scene in one shot.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you talked about waiting, I mean, I think that was the biggest, that was really what allowed us to make the film, because, we quickly in the process, it took some experimentation, but we realized that we wanted to capture we wanted to make each frame feel like a painting. We wanted to make it feel like as you were watching the film, you were almost flipping through a storybook, and each new frame would be a page in that book. And that was kind of a conceptual idea, but making that happen is really difficult, especially when you're doing a documentary, because life doesn't stand still for you. People move around, but also, you know, it's just the technical factors of making a film. I mean, the light is constantly changing, and it's very, you know, trying to. At first, I think we were trying to maybe impose our will on the story, on the world, and we realized that wasn't going to happen. And we very quickly realized that we kind of had to slow down our process and let the world speak to us, let the pace of the world speak to us. And ultimately, we ended up we would shoot maybe one shot a day, sometimes no shots a day. And it was really figuring out when to roll the camera. It was like this dance we were doing with the world, you know, observing people, observing the world, waiting for the moment to be right, and that we thought there might be something interesting that might happen, but also waiting for the light to be the way that we wanted to. And in the cases where we were going to light, you know, kind of trying to anticipate what might happen. So, you know, for example, we knew Carlo and Maria had lunch every day at the same time. So we could start lighting a space like that because we knew they would be there eating. So that was kind of, you know, it was constantly evolving, and it was never, you know, it was never a case of, we might go into the day with like an idea of a shot that we wanted to get, or something that we wanted, you know, something that we thought could be interesting that we wanted to capture on camera, but inevitably that idea that we had in our head would kind of either evolve or change completely as we went through the process of filming, because, you know, it would be, you know, a conversation with each other and the world. We would, you know, Mike might point out something beautiful, and we might kind of start heading in that direction, and then, you know, Carlo would be out in the fields, and we would head down that way, and eventually we kind of landed at the right shot. But each shot we wanted to convey a feeling with each shot. We didn't want it to just be pretty. We wanted it to actually help tell the story that we were trying to tell.
Yeah, and it does. And I mean, one of the things that I think it's a reason for people who haven't seen the film should go see it. One, it's just a totally different kind of pace film. You fall into the rhythm of what these people, how they live in Italy, and the Truffle Hunters. And even when you move away from the Truffle Hunters and you move back into the modern world, you still keep that rhythm, which I think is really beautiful. And that's a very hard thing to slow down the modern world like that in those single frames that you did. It's really pretty amazing.
I wanted to add one thing, Peter, just about the still frames that we also felt we wanted people to learn how to see again, to learn how to observe, and also learn how to hear again. And we spent a lot of time on sound design, recording sound, because there were so many things that we weren't used to. We both come from cities, and we're not used to like this beautiful symphony of sound that comes out of a forest. And what forest we were listening to were like these, you know, every hour on the hour, all these church bells ring, all different tones, all over the different valleys, and they echo. And then there's dogs barking, and there's, you know, a stream below us, and there's wind blowing. There's all these beautiful symphonies all happening kind of in just, it seems like it's a very beautiful orchestra that we're listening to. And that was what the sense you get coming into the beginning of the film, is that we wanted people not only to slow down and observe, but also to, what Greg was talking about, feeling this place, feel it, smell it, hear it, you know, and a lot of that came through the sound design was really important to us.
Yeah, the sound is beautiful, and you know, people I think forget, unfortunately, you know, how important sound is to documentaries. Sound is so important, and so you guys, it is really a beautiful piece of work. And also the way that you used music was beautiful also, which was very sparingly, and I thought, you know, really worked well. So for people who haven't seen it, another reason to go. I did want to ask you though about the editorial process a little bit, in the sense that if I was an editor, I might shy away. because you didn't cover anything, right? I mean, usually you walk into an editing room and there's the editor sitting there going, why didn't you get this shot, this shot, this shot, this shot, so that I can cut this thing? And so if you could talk about the editorial process a bit, that would be great.
Our editor couldn't, when we first brought the footage, they couldn't believe what we showed them. They couldn't believe that was all the footage, because they had never seen a film shoot where there was no coverage. I mean, initially we shot a little bit of coverage, but we very quickly stopped. We didn't want to have a safety net. Well, we didn't want the option. We didn't want the option in the editing room, because it would be too easy to fall back on. So, what you see in the film, the scenes might be a minute or 2 minutes long, but that's just a little chunk of usually an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours of just the camera rolling. And so over the course of a 3-hour take, there might be 20 different moments that we thought were really interesting. And in a normal edit, what you could do is you could kind of splice those moments together to make a scene. But we just had to pull one moment, and that moment it couldn't be altered in any way. You're just observing life. And then you have to stack it with all these other moments to make a story somehow. And that, it was a long process that I guess, like any edit, it's kind of putting together a puzzle. But in this edit, the puzzle, I think in a normal edit, you can kind of shape the pieces of the puzzle to sort of fit them to go where you want to go. And here we couldn't shape them. They were what they were. And we had to figure out a way to piece them together to tell the story.
So I think one of the most fascinating things is, and Michael, you have to tell this because I just think it's incredible. How many shots are in the film?
107.
That's
it.
Now think about that for a feature length narrative film, it would be unique. For a feature length documentary, it's unheard of. So you have, and when I say that too, cutting tends to be the way that we deal with pace and trying to build momentum, but all of that's there through these 107 shots over a period of 3 years. And I have to tip my hat to you both that you were able to really stay. Every time I start to do a film where I think I'm going to do it one way, I always break it. I'm just not brave enough to stay like what you guys did. I mean, what you guys did is really, that's a hard thing to do.
It didn't start out that way. We did test other ways of shooting in the beginning.
Yeah, sure, but you landed on it. And,
we did. Yeah, we did.
And I'm curious.
It was terrifying.
It was.
When we got into the edit, and the editor's like, they kept trying to put jump cuts in the scenes. They were like, "There's no way we can make this work." It was terrifying, but we through process we figured it out.
Kept saying, "Where's the other drives? Can you send me the other drives? I have the one. Can you send me all the rest of the drives?" And we said, "This is it. That's all we got." He's like, "Oh, this is." Remember the first editor, Greg? His first editor said, "I can edit this in a day." Remember? He said, "I could do this in a day." We're like, "I don't think so." It took 8 months, not him, but another editor. But he thought it was so easy because there's so little material. But it became, of course, an arduous process of trying to weave together this mosaic. It took us 8 months, the better part of 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's wonderful too is that the way that you learn about the characters, it has such a sense of truth because you're not cutting them. The conversations are 2 or 3 or 4 minutes long. They don't feel that way, but you're not feeling manipulated whatsoever, which is really unique in filmmaking today. I keep using that word unique because it is just that unique of a film. The other thing that I was curious about, if you had like 4 or 5 moments that while you were shooting, that when they happened in front of the camera, that usually when I'm shooting, I know I go in moments like, okay, that's in the film. You know, like that was so good it's in the film. Did you have that? Were there like 4 or 5 times or 10 times where you said, because what I'm getting at is how did you build a story arc the way that you were shooting that film?
I mean, there were some moments like, I mean, actually, even the first shot of the film, when we shot that first shot, it was just, this is a shot of Sergio going up the cliff with his dogs. I mean, we had this kind of, it was actually one of the few days we had this monstrous big zoom lens with us. And we had this idea of, I mean, we had this idea of zooming in on a landscape, and we were out with Sergio and we didn't know what was going to happen. And if you've seen the film, there's just everything just kind of, we're zooming into this mountain. You can't really tell exactly where you are. And we framed it so it looks like you're almost a big abstract painting. And then you see a truffle hunter emerging and the camera slowly moves into him and his dogs. And that was one of those moments we just looked at each other and we said, wow, that's going to be in the film. But a lot of the moments, you know, there were moments that I think we thought were quite visually spectacular, but a lot of the moments emerged that we discovered them in the editing process, because we came to understand some of the Piedmontese language while we were filming, and we had a translator with us, but she was also our co-producer, so she was involved in a lot of other things off the set. So we didn't understand everything that was happening. And as we were looking through the footage, when we finally got it translated, we discovered there were all these just beautiful surprises. Like one, for example, is that scene with Carlo and his wife Maria when they're at the dinner table, and she's saying, "You have to stop. You're 80." Well, he was 80. I think he was 87 at that time, but now he's 89. You're 87 years old. Your life should be winding down. And he says, "What if this is just the beginning? You know, those years are already behind us. What if this is just the beginning?" And that was another moment where Mike and we looked at each other and we said, that's the film. Like that's everything that encapsulates everything that we're trying to say.
Yeah, because there's this beautiful, you're so right, because of course you made it, but I'm just saying there's that legacy concept of when you're photographing and filming people, you know, you really are the keepers of their legacy. And that moment to me was sort of like everything about, this was something that was so close to him. He's not going to ever give it up. I mean, you know, and I think every character sort of has one of those moments. One is angry, one is, you know, I mean, about the greed that's in the world. There's a beautiful moment with the buyer that, you know, where he's basically, in my mind, you know, you don't explain it, which is great. Training his daughter how to really taste truffles to go into the business later on down in the, you know, down the road. So, I mean, you really did this incredibly great thing of capturing a world that if you didn't film it, it's possible it could go away. And I'm curious because, Greg, I know you've done a lot, Gregory, you've done a lot of work on climate change films. How did climate change play into this in terms of just the truffle area?
Yeah, well, when we started the project, it wasn't something that we were thinking about at all. I mean, I've done films that are focused on climate change, and a lot of them were kind of looking at how climate change is actually impacting rural communities around the world. But when we started this project, that wasn't what we were thinking about. We were just curious. We were fascinated with this world, and we wanted to figure out a way to translate it into cinema. But I guess what happens when you're filming any group of people that lives close to the land, like climate change is it's just part of the story. They see climate change on a daily basis. It's not an abstract concept to them. They are out looking for truffles and they see that there are fewer and fewer truffles every year. And that's one of the biggest threats to this culture. And it's also, it's interesting because, I mean, in some ways, the truffles are maybe the canary in the coal mine for what's happening with the world. They depend on such specific conditions and they're so delicate. And as the global climate changes and the local weather changes, there's just fewer and fewer of them every year. And so like Carlo, for example, he talks about, he's 89 now, and he talks about when he was a child, he would follow his father as he was plowing the fields, and sometimes truffles would just pop up like potatoes. And now, I mean, finding a truffle now, I mean, it's nearly impossible. It's like finding gold. And that's something that it's just something that it's a reality that he's experienced in his life. And he sees every year there are fewer truffles to be found. So the climate change has slowly worked its way into the story, just because I don't think we could have told the story without, addressing it in some sort of subtle way as it flows into the narrative now.
And it's extremely subtle. It's not an advocacy film in any sense. I want to make that clear. It's just really fascinating. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask it was because, Michael, you talked about what you've been doing with the land there, which I think is, for documentary filmmakers, every time we make a film, we're building our family in a strange way. These people who inhabit our films and trust us and let us tell their life stories, they become our family in some way. And it's one of the greatest things about documentary. And you guys are giving back. And I think it's really fantastic. So I'd love for you to share with the audience about that.
Well, we fell in love with this place. Like you were saying, they became part of our extended family in many ways. And we saw how fragile this community is, that if the forest is gone, then really the community is gone. And Greg was talking about, guys, climate change, these mountaintops typically were too cold to grow grapes 5, 6, 7 years ago. They would tell us that we were driving this van all the time with our equipment, and they were saying you would never be able to get this van into our homes. There'd be 2 meters of snow, and now there's no snow. And one scene in the film is Christmas, and it's almost like 50 degrees out. It's just strange. So now, because of that, they're able to grow grapes where you couldn't before, and that means stripping the forests. And deforesting takes minutes. It doesn't take a long time. We had a phone call from Sergio, the man you see, the drummer, and the guy climbing up the cliff in the beginning, and he was in tears, saying, "It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. You have to come down here right away. They're stripping my forest." He called it, because it's all, you could, the law in Italy is you could truffle hunt anywhere you want in Italy. It's not considered trespassing. So someone had bought the firewood and just cut down 200-year-old oak trees that he's been hunting, and his father, grandfather, going back 6, 7 generations, were now basically gone. So to preserve the forest, we started to raise a considerable amount of money that we've handed over a good portion of it already, and they're purchasing the land where we made the film, the forest where we made the film. So it can't be deforested, and the hope that, and there's an educational component also, so we can start inspiring a very young group, the next generation of truffle hunters, to come into the woods through school programs. So that's already happening, and we're hoping that's just going to keep the community intact for more generations.
Well, congratulations on that. I think that's fantastic. And it's one of the reasons we all make films, is to have experiences like that and connect to people like that. I unfortunately am getting the warning that our time is up. All I can say is I just hope for the people who haven't seen it that you go out and find it and see it. Where can they find it now, so people know where to go?
It's going to be, it's released March 5th. It's going to be in New York and LA. It's going to start a slow rollout across the country in theaters only first, which it should be seen in theaters. It's a different experience in a theater, this particular film. And it'll, as the pandemic subsides, it'll be spreading across the country, and then it'll be across Europe as well, starting in May.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for making that film. I loved it so much. I can't wait to see what you're doing next. And thanks very much for participating, with the festival.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Good luck on your Oscar run. I really hope it turns into a nice gold statue for you.
We do. Thank you so much, Peter. It's such an honor. Thank you so much.